guess we'll introduce ourselves first. I'm Neil Markovitz. I'm the VP Tax at British Columbia Investment Management Corporation based in Victoria.
I'm Kim Brown. I'm a partner at McCarthy Tétrault in Vancouver. I lead the tax practice in Vancouver and I sit on the firm's board of partners.
I'm Buck Payne. I'm counsel in the Vancouver office on the capital markets and credit investments team.
Thank you all for coming. Since there's actually two tax people here, we'll have a little show of hands. How many people are actually interested in tax? Sorry about this. We came to talk you out of it. Anyway, really what we are here to do is really just talk about a little bit about BCI itself, because we are, as you know, based in British Columbia, but also really more broadly about the public sector pension plan space in Canada. And that's really, well, partly because of BCI, because we're familiar with it, but also because, as some of you may know, it's actually quite a large area of work in Canada. There are, I don't know how many lawyers there are working across the country in this space, either for pension plans or advising them, but I assume it's well into the hundreds. And we've had BCI has a pretty robust co-op program, including a legal co-op program. We've had a number of co-ops in the past from UBC. So we thought it was a good chance to talk to everybody about it. Forgive us all for sitting down. A couple of us are under the weather, Kim even on her birthday. So we can sing later.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. I know she wanted me to do that. It's not my birthday. So we'll just talk, by all means, any questions you have, feel free to put up your hand anytime and interrupt us. Those are the best kind of conversations. So I guess we'll start by talking a little bit about BCI. I promise there are not many slides. It's actually one of my pet peeves when somebody does a talk and there's like 40 slides or something like that. I think it's better to have fewer. But I will talk a little bit about BCI, particularly for those of you who might actually be interested in living and practicing in British Columbia. So BCI, they say they're one of Canada's largest institutional investors with $295 billion in gross assets under management. Calling us one of Canada's institutional investors is probably not really the right description, because is anybody here familiar with the term the Maple Eight? Is that anyway? So I think Mark Carney actually mentioned us recently in one of his speeches, which was nice. So the Maple Eight, which is actually a term I'd like to get rid of, is a term that the economists use for the 8 largest public sector pension plan managers in Canada. They used it about over 10 years ago, and it's kind of stuck. And it refers to some other organizations that you already be familiar with as well, maybe. But BCI is the British Columbia public sector fund manager, and most of the assets that we manage are public sector pension funds. It's about, by assets under management, it's over 80%. But one interesting thing about British Columbia is because BC is a bit smaller than Ontario. In Ontario, you'll find a whole bunch of these guys, often sort of a single pension plan, like Ontario Teachers Pension Plan, which my mom belongs to, or Ontario or OMERS or OP Trust. In British Columbia, they instead did something a bit different. Because the economy is a bit smaller, they took all this money and kind of smushed it into one and sort of gave it to one fund manager, which is BCI. They did that in 1999. And we also have some of the other big clients that we have include ICBC. So ICBC's auto insurance reserves are actually invested with BCI. WorkSafe BC's insurance reserves are also invested. So if I sort of walk out of here and slip and fall on a piece of pizza that you left on the ground, hopefully we've invested WorkSafe's money good, because I'll have a claim from that. One of the interesting new clients that we have, really kind of a bit of a different one for us, can help us with this one, is everyone calls it the Four Pillars Society. That's not its sort of technical legal name, but there was a class action lawsuit by 325 Indian bands and modern treaty nations across the country regarding residential schools. And the federal government and those nations basically agreed to about a $4 billion settlement. And the money, it's sort of interesting. It's used really in, if you look at the Four Pillars website, it's kind of interesting. It's really used in different ways to kind of restore culture. Very interestingly, it's not meant for economic development, but it is, meant to do things like help people restore their languages and other things. It's about a $4 billion investment that they're meant to use over 20 years. And so they were looking for an asset manager, and they actually selected BCI. That was interesting. I mean, for those tax nerds out there, it was interesting from a number of perspectives because, first of all, it was just different than anything we'd seen. So in terms of any exemptions that it's entitled to internationally, we have to think about it very differently than, say, a typical pension plan, in public sector pension plan in British Columbia. And also just interesting from a legal perspective, because it was the first time that BCI was investing money that wasn't really British Columbia government money. It was a bit different. It was the federal government. So it's interesting, that's a whole talk in itself, but I think that's just kind of one of the novel ones. Anyway, so we have about 35 clients, we call them clients, in the legislation. And like I said, all of it somehow or other connected with the public sector. Okay, it says that we operate on a cost recovery model. That just means that basically we just recover our costs. And that's maybe different from a sort of institutional manager, if you're familiar with them, where they earn like carried interest or have some share of profits. We don't really operate like that. We are a bit different than that. At the moment, the slide was put together, 792 employees in 4 offices. That's Victoria. Victoria is the main office, and that really has to do with the fact that BCI grew out of the provincial government. So before BCI existed, the money was invested by some people in a dingy office somewhere in the Ministry of Finance. It's now moved out to sort of do what kind of the rest of the Canadians do in this kind of independent model. Vancouver, you can go visit us there if you want. New York, London. We do also have an employee based in, she's based in Mumbai. So I guess we could put Mumbai up there, although I think she works out of her house, I'm not sure. 26 investment strategy offerings, 84% internally managed. What does that mean? I don't know what the 26 are like, but basically public markets, private credit, real estate, infrastructure and renewable resources, private equity. Those are kind of the big ones. And that obviously takes a lot of people to manage all that money. Our real estate program, for those of you interested in a job in real estate, is actually based. Has anybody heard of Quadrille? How do people know all these things? I knew nothing when I was in law school. So, okay. Quadrille is the real estate arm of BCI. So when you see Quadrille, you know it's actually the BC public sector investing. Anyway, Quadrille is based actually here in Vancouver, although I think they have offices in Hong Kong, New York, London. They're in a few places. So. And we are the investment manager of choice for, well, they say 32, but I think it's more, and recognized as a leader in ESG. That's actually true. We do have a fairly robust ESG program in terms of how we invest. Just sort of broadly, our clients decide what to invest in, but BCI actually operates independently from them. So, our largest client is probably about $80 billion. That's municipal pension plan, which is sort of, anytime you see a government worker in City Hall or, sort of working, in sort of various municipalities, they're probably, or even some healthcare workers are probably members of MPP. They have the decision as to whether to invest with us or not. They invest all their money with us. They actually have a guaranteed seat on our board as well. Our board is sort of interesting. It's actually, under the legislation, 6 out of 7 members of BCI's board must be from BCI clients. So, but what they don't have control over is what we invest in. They can decide what asset classes they invest in, but they can't say, my sister has this great business based in Vancouver. I really want you to invest in that. They don't. Sorry, go ahead. You have a question? There's 7. So when BCI was set up, there was a piece of legislation called the Public Sector Pension Plans Act. Yeah. Yes. Thank you, Kim. And that hasn't changed since 1999. And what they did is they did a couple of interesting things. So the government had already been investing on a pooled basis of basically 4 large multi-employer public sector plans. The public sector plans wanted more choice over how things were invested. The government was happy to do that within what I described, right? They were willing to create a public sector manager and give those 4 plans control over that manager. And they were all, but on the basis that they would share the risk. So these days, if there's a shortfall in the plan, and we're nowhere near shortfall or well into surplus, the sort of, it's a little more complicated than this, but the kind of way we describe it is the government and the pensioners will have to share, or the workers will have to share the deficit equally. So they might have to increase benefits for workers, and the government would have to put more money in. That hasn't happened, and it's a much more interesting, I think, political discussion than that. But as part of that, they created the board, and the board has those four plans. So municipal pension plan, college pension plan, which I don't think includes UBC, public sector pension plan, which Buck actually belong to as members of BCI, and lots of other sort of provincial government workers, and teachers pension plan, which my wife just joined. They have 4 of the seats. The government gets to name 3, but 2 of them also have to be from BCI clients. I forget. It tends to vary who's on those. And then the 7th person is the chair, and the government names that one as well. So the current chair, Peter Milburn, he's more government affiliated than client affiliated as the chair. But the control, at least in terms of sort of their ability to hire and fire the CEO/CIO and everything else, really rests with the clients in there. It's actually, if you're a governance nerd, it's actually I've always wanted to meet the person who came up with the legislation or the people and just give them what they hug or something, because it's actually not very odd, but it's actually very well written in that it kind of keeps everybody sort of in a particular lane without real sort of control over other things in a way that has actually, it keeps us on our toes because we understand that the clients have the choice to use us or not. It gives the clients a certain requisite element of control. If you follow pensions and you follow what's going on in Alberta, where it's a very different model, things tend to get changed there quite a bit, and there's a lot of unhappiness over time. And BCI hasn't really been in that situation. It's really been quite a success story, whoever wrote it. So does that kind of answer the question? Sorry, go ahead.
So the defined benefit pension, or
Almost entirely, yeah. So most of the clients are defined benefit, but I think UVic is one of our clients, and I think they have some of it is defined benefit, and then there's some defined contribution money as well, and then there's like a mixed plan. And so,
but they get to decide their own asset allocation under the defined benefit structure.
You want to?
Not the individuals.
No, not the individuals. Yeah, that's a good point on the defined contribution thing. I think probably, I don't know. Yeah, that's a question I've never thought about. I mean, that's just a small, I think probably, you know what, I can't answer that question. Nearly all of the money is defined benefit. It's simply based on years of service and, final salary or whatever, last 5 years or best 5 years or whatever it is.
It's sort of a funny world. Like when I was a law student, I sort of pictured defined benefit pension plans were something that my grandparents probably had. I will never have. Or unless you work for the government or certain, like you're a nurse or firefighter or something like that. And I kind of pictured it as people in that sector who, when they would retire, would get some sort of fixed income for the rest of their lives. And it was really secure. It was great. And I never really thought much more about it other than a thing that I would probably never have. And I figured maybe
work for BCI.
Had I known at the time, if I had been one of these, I would have, but, and then I kind of pictured, well, to the extent that I thought about it at all, I would have think, okay, there's some sort of pension fund and they just invest in what you would describe as maybe public markets, maybe some stocks, lots of bonds, income, whatever. And then when I got into private practice, and this is kind of going to your question about what kind of, I would start doing these deals. And it was very much not that. It was very interesting international infrastructure deals and real estate deals and cool private equity deals. And oftentimes the big players and the big investors were these Canadian pension plans. And so I had this sort of moment of like, but this is like the nurses and the firefighters and defined benefit, and they're going to get fixed income for the rest of their life, which is right on the individual level, the person who's actually going to collect the pension someday. But to ensure that they have money to pay out that pension to those nurses and firefighters, there's a whole massive army of pension fund managers that are, as Neil's saying, deploying, 295 billion, hundreds and hundreds of billions. So Canadian defined benefit pension plans, whether aggregated with a provincial investment fund manager like BCI or like an OMERS that just does its own, are these massive global investment bodies for defined benefit, which again, I think for most of the population, we think of it as it's almost like a rare thing to have a defined benefit pension plan. But in the landscape of global investment, although they are rare, maybe among us as individuals, they are a huge kind of player, for lack of a better word, in the world of big investments globally, and Canadians are recognized. And I think that's why you have these very sophisticated, very large teams, the BCIs and the other pension, even though it is that sort of niche area in a way of defined benefit pension plans. So but typically your defined contribution, or where you're like self-managed RSPs or that sort of thing, where you might be dealing with, financial institution to manage your investments.
Interestingly, despite the fact that we kind of like to boast about it, the truth is, in my view, the future in this is really, there's an Australian member of my team who likes hearing this. I think the future is in some ways Australian, because they actually have a much more comprehensive system than we do. This might answer your DC question as well, as I was thinking about it. So in Canada, you don't have to have any sort of retirement plan. In the public sector, we do. A lot of people have just like sort of RSP matching, right? Like I used to work at a company where you put in $5,000 and your employer matched it, and then it went to a bunch of high management expense ratio public market managers who took a big chunk off the top or whatever, and that kind of went into your RSP. Australia is interesting. They're different. Everybody basically has to contribute to their own to pension plans, and they call them super funds, superannuation funds there. And they're DC, but I'm sure they're not. Probably what you're able to do is just sort of choose call it how aggressive your portfolio is. Maybe it's like conservative, moderate, aggressive, or something like that. You're obviously not going to make a decision as to individual investments. So it's probably something more like that. I'm guessing that maybe the DC plan at UVic, for example, may be more like that. We certainly don't phone up every pensioner before we're planning on doing an investment, whatever. Is that okay with you? So it's probably somewhere in the middle, but still a DC plan. But the Australian, you fund them. But we used to do it like that. But Australia is interesting just because it's growing like mad. Their plans are huge. And so, whereas we're in an interesting situation because somebody from one of our large clients once described it, he goes, well, it's really more like a pyramid when you look at it, Neil. And I thought that was a little bit humbling. I'm getting to something I was going to talk about in another slide, but the model that we have was really based on the fact that the economy was growing fairly quickly and public sector workers were growing fairly robustly. So you always had a fairly strong base, and people used to retire and die earlier. And now you've got people living longer, they're spending more time retired. And governments are not growing as quickly, right, for lots of reasons. So you're running into more situations. In fact, a lot of the Maple 8 are actually seeing their pensioners take more money out than is coming in. That didn't used to be happening, but it is happening. It's even a concern for us. It's part of why we're looking for other money to invest for a number of reasons. So that's sort of an interesting challenge that we have. I think Australia is different in that because it's mandatory across the board, it's kind of growing with the size of the economy. So Australia's pension market is actually quite massive and growing quite a fair bit faster than Canada's. Personally, I think we would do well to actually copy the Australian model, but that's another story.
I think I saw something about Canadian and Australian pension funds in the news.
Oh, the memorandum of understanding. Did anyone else read the exciting memorandum of understanding between the Canadians and the
just you up there?
Yeah, nicely done. Yeah. So does everybody know that Mark Carney went to Australia the other day? Okay. Well, apparently he was waving around, I guess, this memorandum of understanding. And what it was several of the Australian super funds and the Maple 8 Plus, I think a couple others, signed basically a memorandum of understanding where we agree to work together with the Australians on how to sort of promote pension investing in Australia. And we have a number of investments in Australia. We have part of the New South Wales power grid. We have a mushroom company in Australia. We had a port, railway, and I forget the other one, a couple that we've sold. Actually, all of the Canadian public sector pension plans are pretty heavily invested in Australia. Those are hard deals to do, including from a tax perspective. The Australians are brutal. They're like the tax mafia. It's just like a shakedown. And then the Australians are actually looking to diversify because they tend to. It's pretty typical, including us, despite what the previous government was saying. We actually are pretty heavily invested in Canada already. If anything, we'd like to diversify more outside of Canada. But the Australians would like to invest more in Canada, and actually so would we. I mean, the big reason you don't see as many investments in Canada by the pension plans is really because the governments here tend to keep more of those things on their own books. Canada just tends to hold more of its infrastructure assets, but through the government. Whereas I think if anything, we'd love to invest more in those sorts of assets. I'm really talking here more about infrastructure than anything else. Okay, I think we talked a bit about our clients already. I don't know if there's any other exciting ones there. You can see there's a bunch of pensions. You can see some special purpose funds. You can see a couple of government insurance funds. So you can see a lot of stuff there. And then we've got assets under management. I talked about that too. I've kind of stole my own thunder here and said it in terms of these slides. But you can see, it's interesting that the total net is there 250 million. We keep updating things, so things keep changing. Those numbers will change depending on the year. But I don't think there's anything there that I haven't told you.
I guess maybe you're on the
Oh
last
my
one.
goodness, we're missing
Well,
a slide. There's a slide missing. This is outrageous.
uh-oh.
I'm gonna have to talk. Okay, now I'm gonna have to. There was a slide at the UVic one that's missing. I'll tell you about it.
Can you go back
That was like
to
half my
the
discussion.
asset class one?
Yeah, I could go back to the asset class one.
So I would say,
Say, and Rebecca, go for your thoughts on this one. No, sorry, the next one.
Okay.
so if I look at those asset classes, if I, put like, what could I do as a lawyer in those asset classes? It seems like a lot, and I mean, Beck, you'll have seen this firsthand, right? You're in-house, we're external counsel, but I see like, for sure, M&A, regulatory, compliance, like real estate, debt, fixed income, contracts, IP probably.
Yes.
What other kinds of law might
I mean,
one
all-
touch working with these sorts of assets?
Yes, all kinds. I started in private practice, securities M&A, and now I'm counsel with BCI. And so now my skill set has to be far more expansive because, as mentioned, we're working on investment in Australia. We have to take into concern a pretty serious regulatory regime over there, which is difficult and annoying. And also just, I don't only paper transactions, we're also just kind of standard asset management kind of goings on. So looking at agreement amendments, NDAs, kind of side letter, kind of follow on activities. So, I'm kind of the boots on the ground for just kind of the counsel aspect. And I see the job as kind of three main buckets of working on transactions. So that's kind of reviewing limited partnership agreements, drafting side letters, and eventually kind of investing our money. Asset management activities, so document amendments, MFN reviews, things of that nature, most favored nations. And then finally, it's kind of project-based. And this is different from private practice, I think, in that, we are a big institution, so we're reviewing constantly how can we kind of improve our internal processes. So, just one example is our NDAs. When we receive NDAs and we review them, non-disclosure agreements, how do we best process them? Do we want to send them to this team? Do we want to send them externally? So right now, for example, I'm part of a group that's working on kind of making that process more efficient, which these types of things aren't necessarily as common in private practice, where it's much more, I think, just kind of focused on the kind of your specialty at hand.
Nothing's efficient.
Working on it.
Yeah, no, I think that's it. It's, as noted, it's a very broad kind of aspect of having to practice, certainly BCI, just kind of asset management in general. Which I enjoy. It's an expansive kind of learning environment, particularly coming from kind of a focus on M&A and securities.
I have a follow-up to that. You were mentioning that you draft LPAs. From my limited research and knowledge, there aren't many private or big law firms in Vancouver that have specific investment funds or fund formation groups, as much as other cities do in Canada. I'm curious, is that work usually done by council then, or is it that it's just not a separate group?
We do a lot of it, so I don't know I think it depends on the firm. We have a very large private equity fund practice, so that's definitely fund formation, funds on funds.
Yeah.
You'll do your own, I think, in-house for some.
Yeah,
I know we look
yeah,
at some,
review
sometimes it
fees.
depends on the
Yeah,
context.
exactly. And one, just on the LPA kind of aspect, one big point that we work with external counsel on is comment memo. So, we have the LPA, okay, counsel, use your big brains, tell us what are the red flags, tell us the mechanics of this investment, what should we be watching out for? And then kind of building off that, we have the LPA, which kind of is the ballpark of the investment. And then we go to the side letter, which is kind of GP investor specific, which is kind of the sandbox that kind of defines your specific investment. So you're kind of looking at two different streams, but yeah, definitely LPA and the comment memo are very big lifts on the investment. Yeah.
I really see us, I mean, this is not, and this is true, like as soon as you go into what, I was working for an accounting firm when I left, what they call industry, which is basically not working for, one of the big four or a law firm or something. Once you're, and this was told to me as soon as I joined, I worked for about 7 years for a fund called Northleaf based in Toronto before. And what I was told then was, I'm not paying you to replace advisors, I'm paying you to manage the advisors. And this is something, Kim's not even right, yes. No, but really, like, when it comes to a particular technical issue or that kind of more sort of specialist knowledge, we can't keep up with what McCarthy's or any one of the number of law firms around the world that we use do. Particularly when it's outside Canada, but even inside Canada, right? Like if we're, we own part of the Chilean power grid, for example, right? We wouldn't touch Chilean law issues, and there's just no way. So we would obviously use Chilean counsel there. What I was told that is, your job really is not to replace them, your job is to manage them. And so what we have is an inherent understanding of how BCI works and our clients' priorities and operational issues. And what the law firms have is that outside technical skill to sort of understand issues. And we kind of play that role in between. And that's true in tax, and it's true in legal as well, right? So most of the time, the agreements that we're seeing, some of the more technical legal work that we're seeing is done by the lawyers. But Kim and I work on a lot of stuff internationally, and a lot of times it's sort of, Kim kind of takes this, like I kind of understand BCI and sort of what we're trying to accomplish, and Kim understands a lot more of the sort of legal stuff, that we're sort of working.
I do think some very good stuff, thanks.
Well, yeah, but, and that's sort of how we work. That's how we work, for example, with McCarthy's. And like I said, we work with, I don't know how many law firms we work with around the world, but it's a pretty heavy legal spend. So that's why, when I was saying, that it's not just working for, and if you guys will indulge me, I want to talk about the other Maples for a second, but it's not just working for an entity like BCI or some of the others. It's also, a lot of the law firms do a lot of work in this space as well. The other, are you got your hand up or are you just?
Well, I do.
No, go ahead.
How would you compare what BCI does to something like North?
I would say it's similar. BCI has a broader investment, a broader set of, like it's a much bigger organization. It has a broader set of investments. I had to learn more stuff. It probably has more kind of corporate sort of internal stuff you have to understand as well. Like I learned the hard way what Reg 105 is, or things about whether we have to pay PST and stuff like that. Like I'm responsible in my team for not just sort of investment tax, but all the tax stuff that goes on. Northleaf, I would say, the Maple 8 or the Maples are really more capital allocators, right? Like there are sometimes people who are like, yeah, we should get like carried interest or something like that. It's like, look, Northleaf has to go and all these funds, they have to go out and find clients, right? They have to go out and prove they're better than someone else. While I'm sitting talking to you right now, there are hundreds of thousands of people across British Columbia who are working or paying into insurance reserve companies. And a little tiny bit of that money is going to BCI, right? Just as it's happening at CPPIB and all the others as well. So we're really more capital allocators than fundraisers in quite the same way. Doesn't mean we don't do some of that, we do. But the fundraising is very different. It's much more of a political process here, much slower, much more complicated. Whereas at Northleaf, I was involved in fundraising quite a bit more. And my successor, who I just bumped into today, actually in Vancouver, he was like going over to Japan and Australia, all kinds of places to meet investors and stuff. So more fundraising there. I'd say that's sort of one difference. So, but I liked them both. I like both the jobs for the same reason. I like the idea of kind of, I'm not really at this point that interested in tax anymore, beyond the fact that I have an interesting skill that I'm working with a bunch of other parts of the organization and we're all trying to pull together as well. And I find that kind of working with the team and trying to develop staff, that's the kind of stuff that I find inherently satisfying. So whereas maybe when I was younger, I was like, cool, I'm going to like sort of look into this particular section of the Internal Revenue Code or something. And now it's like,
For those of us who do still like tax, the other.
no, I noticed I said Internal Revenue Code just to make this distinguish.
I mean, the other thing that comes to mind between Northleaf and BCI is your clients and their tax characteristics. Right?
Yeah,
so
that's
Northleaf
true.
will pull in
Canadian taxable, Canadian tax exempt,
That's true.
and non-Canadian. So all of them have very different tax structuring considerations, whereas
BCI's client base, although different types of exempt, I'll use that word
very broadly have some similarity in terms of their profile, which impacts how you can structure these investments and the factors and things you have to consider in the model.
There's one thing I'll tell you all now, in case any of you go work in the funds management industry, there is one universal truth. The smaller the client, the harder they are to do. So, and there's good reasons for it. It's because it's their money, as opposed to like some big organization. But if you ever go into that thing, just be ready. We didn't really, the slide that had the picture of all the other maples on there is missing. I don't know what happened to it. It got taken out suspiciously, but we didn't come here just to talk about BCI. I wanted, lots of you are going to go to Toronto or Montreal or Calgary or somewhere else in your careers, or you may just, whatever. Like I said, it's a bit of a made in Canada, this sort of move to sort of have this stuff in house is a bit of a kind of a made in Canada thing, but it has kind of spread elsewhere. We do actually, we have peers that we deal with in other places as well. We deal with some in the Middle East and some in Europe as well. There are people that, when I go to the conferences, I see the same people over and over again from the Netherlands or from Abu Dhabi or Australia or elsewhere. But in Canada, there's sort of, like I said, they call them, they Maple 8, but there's really more of them now. And so I'll just rattle off some names. So if I had the slide here, you wouldn't have to do this. The Canada Pension Plan Investment Board is the one that invests the CPPIB money. That's sort of the big one in Canada. They're kind of our leader. In Ontario, there's OMERS, which is municipal, and they're fairly large. OP Trust, which is a bit smaller, which does some public sector. HOOP, which is the healthcare employers in Ontario. Ontario Teachers is based in Ontario. They're all based in Toronto, these guys. IMCO is interesting. That's a relatively new one. IMCO is kind of like the BCI of Ontario. Some of the others are big enough on their own. I think the same idea of kind of bringing more of Ontario's public sector money in to sort of invest it at scale is why IMCO exists. In Edmonton/Calgary is AIMCO, like I mentioned. And then in sorry if I missed anybody in Ontario. There's other smaller ones. In Quebec is PSP, which is like the sort of federal workers. So that's like the military, Canada Revenue Agency, et cetera. Our CEO now was previously the CEO of PSP. And then the other one in Quebec is the Caisse de dépôt et placement de Quebec. And they are kind of like the BCI of Quebec. They're sort of the original in some ways, in that I think the case was set up like back in the 60s. And interestingly, if you go looking in like French law, you'll find this concept of a case seems to have like some history as well. So it seems to be, I think they have a bit of a different model in terms of tax and stuff like that. We sort of, sometimes BCI and AIMCO and IMCO will sort of go to the IRS or Department of Finance asking for particular things. And we always include CDPQ because they always include us and everything. And they're always like, we don't need you on this one because we're different, we're special. So we deal with them all the time. They're very nice people. And they're very good, so, but they don't need our help a lot of the time. Anyway, the sort of big kind of internalization that was the big initiative, I think in some ways it was CDPQ before anybody else, but in the early 90s, Ontario teachers, I think, were the ones who figured out. And Gordon Fife, our CEO, sort of had a good example of this. He said, fund managers like private equity masters of the universe kind of characters will sort of come visit us in Victoria. And he said, you can generally spot them because their private planes are parked in Victoria Airport. And I said, trust me, we don't have a private plane. So, I think the point he was making was, and what Ontario Teachers was trying to do is look, rather than pay outside managers to invest different priorities, different timelines, different everything, let's try and internalize this and do it up themselves. And I think it was the sort of early 90s when just the right people in different places, the teachers union, et cetera, got together and sort of created the model out of Ontario Teachers. One of the first things they bought, it pains me to say as a Torontonian, was the Leafs. It didn't seem to make any difference to the Leafs' success. So hopefully it doesn't happen to the Canucks. Ontario, they were kind of the first to do this. Canada Pension Plan was sort of a little more of a grand bargain among the provinces and the feds a little bit later, but everybody kind of saw what they were doing, including internationally. BCI did this kind of in the late 90s, and I'm assuming that the pension plans here, again, I haven't spoken to them about it, kind of saw what was going on in Ontario and elsewhere and saying, hey, you know what, why don't we get this away from just a dingy basement in the Ministry of Finance and put it into sort of an independent organization like BCI. So that's kind of the origin of the Maples. But they, like I said, they are all over the country, and there are lots. I mean, I think there's about over $2 trillion there, but there's a lot more pension money across the country. I deal with some of the smaller ones. At least when I was involved with I think it's Pension Investment Advisory Council, PIAC. There are a lot of the smaller plans there as well. They don't have as big investment teams. They don't do as much direct investing, but you probably get a lot of work from smaller plans
Yeah,
as
we
well.
see them. I think there's, if I recall correctly, there's a good website if you look at the largest defined benefit pension plans in Canada. I think you'll see the ones that you mentioned, as well as some of the public, like the larger public companies that still have defined benefit that have significant assets under management. But you're right, it's like the teams there are not anything like the size or complexity that you'd see at a BCI or an Oberst or something like that.
Yeah, and I guess probably the banks have decent sized ones as well. So
Yep. I think you can't get into those plans now, but they have the plans.
have they all switched to DC? Okay.
I think the DB still exists, but as if you were to join the bank today, you couldn't be part of it.
Yeah, I believe. Yeah, I mean that's a big. Remember, I said the number of workers to retirees is changing. I think a lot of plans, particularly private plans, have moved away from the defined benefit model to defined contribution, just because it's just not a risk that they can take anymore. So, and the Australian plans, for example, are DC. So it really depends. There's still some countries, the US is interesting for a couple of reasons. Like their social security program seems to be more pay as you go. So they don't really have, rather than have any savings, I think they just have some money invested in short-term bonds. The US defined benefit plans, and there are 50 states, and they're all huge. We don't see them at all. You go to conferences, you don't see them. We're hardly invested or anything with them. If they sort of moved, I think it's more of just a general US mistrust of government, or maybe it's the lobbying from the New York private equity industry. I don't know. I'm kind of suspicious, but I think if they joined, it would be a completely different market. So we do co-invest with them indirectly because we co-invest with a lot of fund managers. Like a lot of our deal flow, we don't find it ourselves. It's a lot of managers. We'll write a big check to to private equity fund X, and they will sort of show us what's called co-investments. But we don't see I've never seen Minnesota teachers in a deal or something like that. So, question.
I have a very non-technical question.
That's great, because I'm not a very.
else. You say you hate the Maple Lakes term. Why? I'm just curious. It seems really easy and right.
You know why? I'm trying to replace it with just the Maples because there's more than 8. So it was The Economist who wrote that, in 2012 in an article. And I think we're just excluding our smaller friends. IMCO, a good friend of mine is the head of tax for IMCO, and I'm always like, Alex, I'm trying to get you included in these things. So I just think the Maple, or I've seen Maple 8 Plus or Maples or whatever, but I don't know. And the Maple 8 kind of rolls off your tongue. It's easy, I often say. So it's really just me trying to be inclusive and fair to the smaller plans.
Let's say you're at a dinner party and someone's asking what's the difference between your work, what you do, and a typical private equity fund out of New York, or something like that, something not public related.
Yeah.
How would you describe the difference to them?
I mean, I sort of alluded to it before, I guess, that we're sort of less involved in the fundraising side. I think probably our approach, one of my former colleagues who still works at BCI in a different area sort of described it very interestingly. He said the further that you get away from somebody's money, the less people maybe have the same concerns from almost from an ethical basis. I don't mean that sort of unethically or something, but, you know, we could probably do things that are more aggressive from a tax perspective. And there have been situations where I've looked at particular things that have been put in front of us and said, I don't think that's really a direction we want to go through. And I know from the clients that they appreciate that. But, you know, you take your money and you give it to someone and they give it to someone else and they give it to someone else and they give it to someone else before it gets invested in something. By the time you're over there, you may have a person who has no thought about BC public sector. So you probably have a little bit more like, well, we should just sort of get the best tax result we can sort of situation. So that's actually, if you look, this hasn't really been an issue for us, but I've noticed, maybe a little cynical now, some of our peers in Europe who I think do less direct investments and have more time, they've sort of created this code of conduct for their funds that they invest in on tax about how they want them to do stuff. And there's been some resistance, but some of them have agreed to it. And then they'll kind of go and audit them to make sure they're not doing things that are really aggressive. I haven't found that's really been a problem, but I think it is still a concern. Like I haven't seen a situation where it's been a problem, but I think it is always a little bit of a worry when you hand off money to someone else. Like, what are you going to do with that money and how is it going to be a problem? I mean, one example I guess I could give you is the Paradise Papers. And if you remember the Paradise Papers, so we were named in the Paradise Papers. All the maples were, I'm just going to say the Maple Lake because I don't know about the ones that were named in the Paradise Papers. And there was good reason for it. There was no intention to hide any money from the government. If anything, we sort of looked to sort of make sure our policies reflected the fact that we wanted the CRA to have access to it because we were not trying to hide any money or anything like that. But these are still, the people who use what they call tax havens for different things, and a lot of just gets used by the investment management industry for really more for sort of investor sort of, I could get into it, but not for sort of aggressive tax reasons. So we were quite happy to explain to our clients why we were doing that. If anything, it was kind of a welcome opportunity because they were like, what's going on? I was like, nobody's hiding any money. That's not, like, I wouldn't sign up on something like that. So I think that's probably something, I think some of the private equity funds are probably just in a bit of a different place than that. Although saying that, my experience has been that they understand that as well, right? Like, I think they get who their clients are. If they get themselves into real trouble, that reflects poorly on us. And it's, I mean, you probably spend a lot more time on this issue than I do in terms of lots of other.
I was just going to say, I think just as a very practical example, we have legislative concerns we have to watch out for. Just so if we give an indemnity, we either have to get an approval for that, which is another project I'm working on. Like, how can do we have to get this signed off every single time, or can we have like a blanket approval? Or we just have to push back, for example, in an NDA, say, this is a very onerous internal process. Can we just strike this? And that I'm aware to this. I'm sensitive to this because it's almost a daily concern of what we can accept, how we can accept. So I don't think kind of your typical hedge fund in New York would be dealing with legislative concerns like that.
I think your incentive structure is different, and you touched upon
Very
this before, right?
Yeah.
So if you think about a typical private equity fund, there's usually a sponsor and a sponsor vehicle. So those are sort of like the brain trusts that put the fund together and decide how to deploy the assets, but they're earning fees and carry, and that's their return. So that it just leads to different incentives and a different approach. Whereas, as Neil mentioned, under BCI statute, they operate under a cost recovery model, meaning they don't have that same kind of compensation or incentive structure. So I think it creates different culture. It creates a different level of transparency and motivations.
Yeah, we have no equity in any of our investments. Yeah. That's not something we do.
And you're not pulling performance fees in that.
No.
You're covering your costs and that's it.
Exactly. I mean, if you look at the side letters, legal goes through quite a bit of effort to basically make it clear to fund managers what they can and can't do, right? It's not like, here's the money, do whatever you think is interesting. It's here's the money, and and that would, I think that would damage their reputation as well. If you're sort of, if you kind of have a reputation as a fund, as a cowboy that's going to get your investors in the press, people are going to pull back and say, I'm not really sure that's something we want you to do. So, I mean, it's an interesting, this is not a direct example, but one I remember very interestingly was Ohio, so I remember I told you that the US funds tend to be, the US pensions tend to be more in funds. Ohio something state workers was in one of the New York pension plans that owned Hugo Boss. And I may be getting the state wrong, but they wanted to close a Hugo Boss factory in the US. And the pension plan said, we don't want you to do that. Now that's a bit different, right? That was a little more sort of the unions kind of understandably looking out for US jobs, but it does show you don't just sort of hand over the money to somebody else and you can do what you want. So even when I was in Northleaf, I mean, it was, you sort of, you learn it sort of in tax and legal to some extent, I'd say, where sometimes, I don't want to say that the investment teams are aggressive, but they'll have conversations with us and I think they'll find we're not cowboys or cowgirls. We just we tend to take a little more of a conservative approach. So I hope that answers it. So, any other questions?
I have a
Yeah.
related question. Is there an effort towards moving more of your investments towards internally managed, like direct
Yes.
investments?
Absolutely. Yeah, perfect example. I mean, the previous CEO / it's CIO, CEO and CIO are one person at BCI. The previous one, the one who took sort of when BCI left the ministry and became independent, operated BCI very differently than everybody else. I'd say BCI was kind of the last to jump to more of an internalized model. Gordon Fife, who's I think he joined in 2014. And like I said, he was previously CEO of PSP, and he was very much focused on that internalized model. I mean, he basically told the board, he said, if you want to know what I'm going to do at BCI, look at what I did at PSP. And he was very, very open about that. So, examples are, we fired over the next number of years a number of external public sector managers. We had probably 80 or 90 funds, or maybe more than 100 fund manager relationships. We now have 30. I mean, there's more than 30 funds in there. There's sort of individual managers. They have multiple funds. We've done a lot of secondary transactions where we've sold off a lot of our private equity fund interests. The real estate program had a lot of internal managers as well. It was also very Canadian focused, which was interesting. A lot of that money's now been moved internationally. So that was 2014. Like, I got hired basically to build the tax team. But when I got there, it was just me on the tax team, and there was probably 4 lawyers, and now there's probably like 25 lawyers at BCI.
Yeah.
Your total headcount is gone.
Yeah, the headcount was like, everybody had their own $1 billion. It was like 180 people and 180 billion under management. The issue was that we were paying a lot of those external manager fees. It wasn't, this is really not what the Maple 8 have really, that was really their innovation, I think. And that was really what Gordon was trying to do. Other things too, like, we basically built a new building, which we half own. We built it with the Jol family. So we kind of pay half the rent to ourselves. Quadrille, as part of Quadrille, they took over. So, you're familiar with Bentel Kennedy or Real Star, or I think the other one was I want to say Sunlight. We had an option to acquire their real estate management services people. So I'm going to say it's the people who sweep the floors, but it's everything in terms of managing buildings. We basically had an option to acquire all those. So Quadrille has an investment team. It also has a huge real estate services program. So in a sense, we're kind of paying ourselves. So that, very, very much over the years that, and before, in 2014, you probably could run the organization with a small legal team and a small tax team, because everything was kind of outsourced, right? I mean, it doesn't really take a lot to put money in a private equity fund. I mean, you need somebody. I used to do it at Northleaf, but it isn't that hard to do because most of the work is done by the fund itself. So that's really been the whole I'm getting tired of the term journey, but that's been, sort of since 2014 to now, that's really been BCI's sort of big innovation along with our peers. So, and that's why we need people like you. So, and that's why they need you all over Canada. So, and I'm serious. Or Australia, or the Netherlands, or Middle East, or wherever you want to go.
Or in private practice supporting all these wonderful organizations. Just get out of there.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, a bit more general questions on that, because a lot of modern countries nowadays say, birth rate is lower.
Yeah.
The pension take is more.
Yeah.
So you have a problem of aging of the society.
Yeah.
So not only the pension, but the government's budget is going to be the ratio of the contributor is much less than the the tickets.
Yeah.
So so from time to time we will see who analysis say, this pension fund is going to grow in 2030 or 40 or 50s. Do you have any insight or your views on that?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, from an insider view. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not, is the question just sort of how do countries deal with aging?
No. It's just how do you think this theories? Yeah, those theories, right? It's not proven theories. Do you agree on that, or some of you have any views from the designer, or you think no, we won't be lost.
We won't be, sorry?
We won't be broke. Yeah, the pension will go forever. Yeah.
Oh, will the pension go forever?
Run out of money, I guess.
Well, I think what you're going to see is more move to defined contribution. I think is pensions. Oh, interestingly, actually, the earliest pensions I could find in history were actually in the Roman Empire, and there's probably even before that. What you had is you had a bunch of soldiers, right? And so they gave kind of the best years of your lives. Sort of fighting for the Roman Empire. And then after that, how are they going to make money, right? A lot of them are probably old and beaten up and stuff like that. So the way they did it was pillaging, right? So we could potentially refresh our pensions by invading another country or something like that. I don't think that's, Carney hasn't said anything about that. I suspect even Trump probably isn't thinking that way. But I think defined contribution is probably the more likely thing than sort of pillaging. So.
Yeah, for the defined benefit pension plans that are the clients of BCI, I mean, they have regular actuarial valuation process. As Neil mentioned, they are tested regularly as to whether they are fully funded or not. It's something that if I'm doing an M&A deal and I see a target that has a pension, it's a big issue for diligence. Is that pension funded or is there a liability there? So on a pension by pension fund basis, they are managed and monitored almost like an audited company. But as to your point, in terms of where is the pension industry going, as Neil said, I think those defined benefit pension plans, they're so expensive that unless you're a large government body or maybe a very large public company that can afford to run them and keep them going, they're hard to come by. And I think you see more and more companies and employers moving to a defined contribution if you're lucky, or really self-funding, like maybe RSP matching or something like that for the employer.
You diligence the pension plans?
I don't personally, no, that's
something that McCarthy's does.
Absolutely.
I have no idea.
Part of an M&A deal.
Wow,
Sure. It's a huge liability sitting on the books, right? You buy a target and they've underfunded their plan.
And they can't pay for their. Okay, interesting. We had a handout. Wow.
I was just building on this point. How do you sell pension funds to ultimately we're going to be that have to face the defined contribution, which might be sucked out by these defined benefit plans?
You mean when you I mean everybody's got to save for their retirement, but I'm just not sure.
RSP.
Okay.
I think that the appeal is the guarantee, right? It's that when you retire, you will get that money, assuming the pension plan has survived, for life, sometimes survivor benefits. If you invest in an RSP, you're investing in the market. It can go up or down. And it can also tie to employer matching. So your RSP is entirely self-funded unless you have a matching program for your employer. Whereas defined benefit plan, your employer's doing a big piece of the contribution. So defined contribution is a little bit of both. So in that scenario, you don't have the guaranteed payout at the end. Your employer is putting in more, and you have some control over what you're investing in. So it's got features of both, but it doesn't have the sort of the ultimate security of a defined benefit plan. The defined benefit plans are just very rare to come by for most employees.
They're if you go to work for the BC government or the Ontario government, or maybe the banks don't do it anymore, but there's certain companies they don't. Okay. There's certain companies or organizations that if you work for, they simply have a defined benefit plan. I wasn't given a choice between DC and pension. It would be also pretty weird if I declined it, considering who I work for. But it's a fair question, right? Because I sort of think about it from my own personal finances. Okay, well, I guess the BC government is guaranteeing that those payments are going to keep, sort of keep being paid out until I go, right? And that there'll be some sort of survivor benefit if I pass away before my spouse or my kids or something. I think maybe it's a bit lower risk because of that guarantee. Maybe if I thought I was an investing whiz and I had the option, maybe I would say I could do better with a defined contribution plan where I actually get to choose sort of more of the investments. I mean, because I work for different companies, I have a mix of both. But I think, probably the way that so my previous employer, I was given the choice, I guess, right? Which was, I wasn't given a choice. I mean, it's effectively defined contribution, but what they said is, look, we have these following managers that you can invest with, and if you put 5,000 in, Northleaf will match the other 5,000. I can't remember the numbers of what they were, right? So that was good because it was free money. So it obviously made sense to put the money in. It was a little bit disheartening because the managers tended to be actively managed mutual funds, which tend to have a higher management expense ratio. So that wasn't great. Everybody kind of wanted index funds, but they weren't offered. So, it was worth getting the matching, but maybe you wouldn't put in more with that. Maybe you'd put the rest of the money in something you invest in yourself. I mean, I don't really have any when you have a defined contribution plan, you don't really have any liability for anybody else, right? So you also see some interesting stuff. You see some kind of more hybrid funds. I think Ontario has them now as well, where there's a bit of a mix between DC and DB. There's all kinds of different stuff out there that people are doing. So.
And you're sort of paying into a defined benefit plan in the sense that you're making CPP contributions off your paycheck.
That's true.
That is one of the plans that Neil's talked about. So we all, as new employees, are paying into CPP.
Yeah, which is apparently funded for the next 75 years.
There you go.
You're awfully focused on your retirement, considering you just
Smart.
Yeah, actually, come to think of it, I wish I had been that smart.
It's an important part of when you're looking at options. I remember the other one for lawyers was, I don't know if it's still true, but I think if you became a judge, you were eligible for full pension after 5 years as a judge. Not like you couldn't start drawing it, but it could be 5 years was all you had to do.
I gotta go put my name.
Yeah, I know, again, this is now some years out, but those are the sorts of things that are if you're looking different employment opportunities, that's a very relevant consideration. So as Neil said, you play into the public sector pension plan. I do not. So, it's relevant to your present value of your total compensation over your whole life and all the things that can happen during your life. So that's more
Okay.
financial planning than
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, we still have like 15 minutes.
Sure.
Given that you guys are clearly still so very young, it's not that big of a jump that you meet your young law student self.
Yes.
And you're having to explain why you like your career. How would you do so?
Oh, why I like the.
Yeah. Or we must be presuming you like your career, but I'm
start with the
hoping
youngest.
so.
Yeah, let's start with the youngest person here.
I think it's just the breadth of activity and just surrounded by very bright, competent individuals. I think I'm still relatively new at BCI, but I'm just still learning daily. And just I have the benefit of working with very specialized individuals. People on Neil's team, tax guys, they're involved with everything. I always pick their brain, and then I have external counsel. And I would be a mid-level associate in private practice. And then, in my position, I can correspond with a 20-year partner or something, just very, very deep in their expertise. And for me, that's a huge benefit. And I think it's a fairly unique position. So I think just the opportunities I have to correspond with very, very interesting and bright individuals is probably my top choice.
Can I make a pitch for private practice?
Right.
Well, first of all, tax law for me is the most fun law to do ever. It's still, it is. I mean, I remember my first few days as an articling student, and I would sit in these boardrooms and the tax folks would come in and be some complicated international M&A transaction, and they'd get up on the whiteboard. Yes, it was whiteboard. And they'd start drawing boxes.
You love
Go this way. Yeah, you do, right?
Yeah, I love whiteboard.
And they draw this structure that, okay, it's more efficient with that over there, make this a partnership, and then that picture would become the picture of the deal that our partners had to go off and make happen, work with the regulatory. So it's just sort of that creative design element, global efficiency, all of the things that I really enjoy. So on the technical side, I just really enjoyed the practice of tax. I think as a partner at a national firm that is fully integrated across all offices, yes, that's my pitch for McCarthy's. I do have other clients, don't but I get to see just really interesting businesses, industries, both in Canada, across Canada, outside of Canada, and the clients that I work with clearly are super sophisticated in-house folks. Like they're not calling me with a basic, can I deduct this or not, unless it's like a gazillion dollars. It's, we're doing a Chilean infrastructure and these are who we're investing in. This is the model that we're using. How do we do this? Working with these 3 sets of rules. And if you're working with creative, experienced people and you're kind of, they're partners with you, you're not telling them what to do because they know what they're doing. It's a really fun, collaborative, creative process. And it's the sort of stuff that it's complicated. It makes you think it's a little scary because the dollars are big and it's important stuff because it's people's pension money for these folks, but it's still exciting. It's fun.
So I remember when I was interviewing for BCI, and the interviews are always the same. And he asked me the question that I actually realized is the most important question that I ask anybody when I interview them, or one of the sort of 2 or 3 most important. And he said, what are you not good at? What are you sort of not interested or not good at? And I thought, do I answer this honestly? Like, what the hell? I said, I'm not really into detail. And they still hired me. So, you know, but I think, like, I don't, I sort of the 10 years before I worked at Northleaf, I was working in tax, but working for accounting firms. I worked for PwC in Toronto, and then I moved to England with my now wife, and then we came back. And especially toward the end, I noticed I started to just, like, Sunday nights, I wasn't that happy about having to go back in and stuff. And then I went to Northleaf. And like, I think for me, you can kind of think about things more in terms of broader business goals or client goals, and you can kind of think about how to make things work for everybody else. I take real pride in my team. You know, they understand their job is, you know, I'll go through the metaphor. I sort of describe it as, you know, we're the ones who, there's a house, and we're the ones who either do the electrical or the plumbing or the gas or whatever, right, and stuff. And nobody really cares about any of that stuff. But when an investment team says, oh, we're going to be earning something, there's going to be a little bit of electrical and a little gas. And we know kind of how to run all the wires and stuff like that. But what we really pride ourselves on doing is trying to support them and get things right and get things to work for everybody around the organization. And I really enjoy that part of it. I mean, there's also some weird policy stuff that I find that's where I kind of nerd into it and get into details, can attest to. But I just like the idea of sort of, I don't like focusing on detail, but I kind of get to think about a lot of things, more about kind of broader goals. I just find that a lot more fun. Which doesn't mean, you know, like, I didn't enjoy some of the time I was working in-house, or sorry, working for PwC or Deloitte, but I think I've always kind of preferred this. So,
Thank you.
I see a couple of you sort of wanting to pick up your computer and run off. If you need to go, and if the rest of you, or we can just stop. But I mean, if other people have questions and you want to run out, don't feel you're being rude. So, or maybe we have no questions. I don't know. So. Hope I don't miss my helicopter. Okay, well, then no other questions, and thank you very much.
Yeah.